Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, guys, based on the time zones you all are coming from. So, guys, before we start with the session, can you all please give me a quick information? If you all can see my screen and hear me loud and clear as well. Perfect. Thank you for the confirmation, everyone. So, before we get started, let me quickly introduce myself to you all first. So, my name is Neeraj Keria, and I have been working in this IT industry for more than 13 years now. So before we get started, let me quickly introduce our Edureka Masterclass community with you all as well. So this community of masterclasses was started back in 2019, and since then we have been closing into almost 30,000 members so far. And in these masterclasses, we conduct multiple webinars and live events on different topics, including blockchain, IoT, artificial intelligence, machine learning, on data science, on big data, on RPA, on PMP, and on multiple front-end and back-end development technologies. And the best part about these webinars are they are absolutely free of cost, so there are no charges involved here. And these webinars are a really great platform for anyone to start learning the technologies that we are interested in. All right, so let's get started. So the main motto of this entire webinar is we are going to discuss on what exactly Selenium is from scratch. So the main agenda for today's session, we are going to talk about what exactly is testing in different projects and what exactly we mean by manual and how manual testing and automated testing, they both are structured. And then we are going to talk about all the available automation testing tools where Selenium has been the leader. Then we are going to talk about advantages and disadvantages of Selenium, how Selenium compares with all the other tools as well. And then we are going to talk about the Selenium suite of tools, as in the IDE, the RC, the Grid, WebDriver, and then we are also going to discuss on Selenium XPath as well as a part of our discussion today. So, first of all, if we talk about manual testing, then software testing is where it all boils down to. So today's world of technology is completely dominated by machines, and their behavior is controlled by the software powering it. So will the machines behave exactly as we want them to? Obviously, and that too every time, everywhere. The answer is plain no, correct? So we have to so that's why we have to continuously test that whatever we are planning to, so whatever application that we have deployed, so that should be working as expected, correct? And in case there are some kind of issues, then that should be reported as soon as possible. That's the main purpose of testing, correct? So at the end of the day, it is the software's application success rate, which is going to control our business growth, correct? And the same thing can be said even for web applications because most businesses today are completely reliant on the internet. For example, any e-commerce company, be it Amazon or eBay or Flipkart, they rely heavily on customer traffic on their websites and traffic on their web-based mobile applications for business. And if something catastrophic happens, like the prices of a number of products being capped off at suppose $10, all because of a small bug in a not so easily readable part of the code, then what can be done and how can we prevent it the next time? So by testing the code before deployment, right? So that is a need of software testing. And if we talk about Selenium, then it is a software testing tool, and Selenium is an automated testing tool as well available. So for example, we can consider this scenario. So where we have a registration form available in, now this form can be on any mobile application or on any website. So when we sign up, so again, here we have multiple fields, like we have sign up with the username, password, name, address, country, email, the options to select sex and the language, and then we have submit, correct? So these fields, again, whenever we are talking about any real-time application, they all need to be thoroughly tested. So testing web applications manually involves loading all transactions. So we have to ensure that each and every field, they are working exactly as expected. Suppose what is the maximum capacity of username, the maximum number of characters username is taking in, and if the username can be left blank or not, if the password has been well validated, and the users are entering the password as per the password policy defined, having a mixed combination of alphanumeric characters and that too in a given that of a given size, correct? And the address, the country dropdown is working fine or not. The email section is validating the email input or not, and the users they should be entering their gender and their language as well, correct? So these all things and again once the user clicks on submit, then that field then that is going to be recorded and saved is and or not in the database or not, correct? So these all things have to be validated so that we can make sure that whoever is going to use this form, they are going to have their data recorded without having any kind of issues. That is why we need to have a software testing done. And we do that for any manual testers. Doing this task repeatedly means it's going to be boring, it's going to be time consuming, it's going to be tedious as well. And in case they and or since humans are involved here, so obviously it's natural that multiple times the errors are going to happen, correct? And we know that tests are performed manually in every environment using a different data set, and the success or failure rate of every transaction should be recorded. All right. So now if we compare the automation testing versus manual testing, then automation testing beats manual testing every single time. Why? Because it is faster, it needs less investment in human resource, it is not prone to any kind of errors, frequent execution of tests is possible, it supports light out execution, supports regression testing, and also functional testing as well. So let's say here we can create a script in automated testing because at the end, let's say here we want to validate the form. If we go back, we had a form, right? So in this form, we have to validate the number of characters. Suppose for the username, we have to verify if the password contain the required format in terms of passwords or not. And if the users they click on submit, then the details are being recorded or not. All right. So these things again for testing these are things. Okay, this is something that can be automated by using a simple script where we can define our entire logic, and then based on the logic, these things are going to be automated. So we don't have to rely on manual testing methods here. That's how it works. That's why we can simply create a simple single script, and then we can use a script for automating the entire process of testing. And then whatever the output of the test is, that can be visualized over a dashboard or it can be reported back to the developers as well. And moreover, so these tests can be configured in such a way that they are tested in different environments and web browsers. So what else can be done? We can also automate the generation of result file by scheduling it for a particular time during the day itself. And we can also automate the generation of reports based on those results and whatnot. So Selenium here doesn't have the support of any kind of visualized reports. So for that, we can use some other tools like we have JUnit, through which we can create a complete visualized report out of the results being generated as a part of the automated test here. All right, next we have the advantages here. So as we know, again, it offers a better and faster execution. It is more accurate because here the chances of any kind of errors is less. It offers less investment in human resource because everything is going to be automated. And then if you talk about features of automated testing, that supports regression testing for any specific component, and then it can be completely automated to run at a frequent interval, and that too at a specific time, and supports the light out execution for the specific layouts in, especially if you talk about the web-based applications. And Selenium is a suite of software tools to automate the web browsers, and it is open source. That means there is no licensing involved here in Selenium, and it is used for functional testing and regression testing as well. And it supports different platform, Java, Python, C, PHP, Ruby, Perl, JavaScript. So there is no foundation. There is no foundation that we have to stick to a single programming language, we can use Selenium and we can code it in any platform, be it Python or be it Java, where Python, Java are the most widely used platform there. And then it supports different operating systems. That means we can code in one and then we can execute in other as well. It supports Windows, Mac OS, Linux, iOS, and Android as well. And it also supports different platforms, right? So basically, we can run this, we can perform multiple testings on different platforms as well, as and when required here. Next, we have the advantages and disadvantages of Selenium. So in terms of the advantages, since Selenium has multiple advantages over here. So Selenium, first of all, if you talk about disadvantages, then it supports only web applications and it can be used since it is open source tool. So only the communities are available. So there is no dedicated support available here. And it is difficult to set up and use because it is open source and there is no enough, it's just not enough documentation available on every process. So the implementation and the troubleshooting is not that easier, and there's no reporting facility available here in Selenium. So Selenium is going to simply give us the end results in a simple script. For example, here we are going to simply get a JSON script as an output, and for converting that result into a visualized dashboard, we have to take the help of some other platforms like we have JUnit. And then it has limited support for image-based testing as well as one of the main disadvantages. And then if you talk about the advantages, then if you talk about open source web softwares, then again, since this is an open source platform, so this is going to be completely free. And then it supports multiple programming languages, so we don't have to stick to just one programming language. We can write the code in Java, C, Ruby, Go, Python, any platform that we are comfortable with. And it supports almost every OS, so we can write the code in one and then we can execute it in another as well. So there is no platform dependency here, and it supports multiple browsers, so there is no limit. So we don't have to stick to just one browser here. We can support multiple browsers, be it Internet Explorer, Safari, Chrome, or Opera, or any kind of browser here. And it supports parallel test execution. That means we don't have to worry about a sequential execution of multiple testing scripts. So we can have multiple testing scripts defined, and then we can run the test on top of them simultaneously. So we don't have to wait for any particular process to get completed. Then only we can continue with the next testing here. There can be multiple testing that can be done, and that to add a simple parallel stage. That's how it works. All right, so now if you talk about Selenium tools and how Selenium compares with other tools, then mainly as a competitor for Selenium, we have tools offered by HP and by IBM. So HP offers QTP, and then we have the quality testing product, and then we have the IBM RFT being offered by IBM as a part of testing platform. So in terms of licensing, so since HP and IBM, they are paid, so yes, obviously they are licensed, they do need licensing, whereas since Selenium is open source, so there is no licensing required here. And the cost for HP QTP is high because of the licensing involved here, and plus these are the ones used for enterprises, so their pricing is higher as well. And then in terms of customer support, we do get dedicated support for QTP and IBM because we are paying for it. And here in Selenium, we have to rely over the community support itself. And then here we need to have a coding experience in QTP, where we don't need to have any coding space in QTP, but when we are trying to use IBM RFT, then we do need to have a coding skills required. And in Selenium as well, we should be very good with the coding aspects because that is what is going to help us in creating the script. And then in terms of the environment support, QTP is offered only for Windows, same as IBM RFT, whereas Selenium, as we discussed, it is not bounded to a single platform. We can use it with Windows, Linux, Solaris OS, or any other platforms. And then QTP supports Visual Basic scripts, IBM RFT supports Java and C, whereas Selenium supports Java, C, Ruby, Python, Perl, PHP, or JavaScript as well. So it is pretty clear that Selenium is the most preferred tool and why exactly it is. And there are multiple tools available within Selenium as well. Like we have the ID or we have the RC first of all. Now RC has been currently deprecated. So RC was available till Selenium 2, but now it has been deprecated. And then we have Selenium IDE. Then we have Selenium RC. No, it's not deprecated. Then we have Selenium WebDrivers and Grid. So basically, when we talk about the Selenium IDE, so which is IDE, as we know, it refers to Integrated Development Environment. So in 2006, Shinya Kasani, so from Japan, had donated his Selenium IDE prototype to Apache's Selenium project, and it was a Firefox plugin for faster creation of test cases. So IDE implemented a record and a playback model wherein the test cases are defined by recording the interaction which the user had with the web browser, and these tests can be playback any number of times as per the requirement. So the main advantage with Selenium IDE is that tests recorded by the plugin can be exported in different programming languages like Java, Ruby, Python, etc. And we can use a plugin as and when required. For example, if we are using Chrome browser, then we have the extension available for Chrome as well. In case we are using Firefox, then we do have the extensions available for Firefox as well, and so on, so that we can make use of. So for example, if we want to make use of this extension, then here we can simply search for Selenium extension for Chrome, and then we will be able to see the list here. So basically here we can get the extension support for Selenium that we can make use of as a part of the Chrome library. Now there are some shortcomings for IDE as well. So plugins are only available for, again, if you talk about the specific plugins here, then again we have some exclusive plugins available for Mozilla Firefox which are not available for Chrome or IE or for other platforms. This is currently exclusive. So in case we are using Firefox, now it has been added to Firefox as well. And it is not possible to test dynamic web applications. Only simple tests can be recorded by using this plugin, and then test cases cannot be scripted using the programming logic. And basically, it does not support the data-driven testing as well. So that is what we have as Selenium IDE. So now if we go back, next we have RC. RC has been currently deprecated. So RC earlier referred to remote control. So before we talk about the details of Selenium remote control, we would like to go a step back and talk about the first tool in the Selenium project. So Selenium Core was the first tool, but Selenium Core hit a roadblock in terms of cross-domain testing because of same origin policy. The same origin policy prohibits JavaScript code from accessing web elements that are hosted on a different domain compared to where the JavaScript was launched. And to overcome the same origin policy issue, testers needed to install local copies of both Selenium Core, a JavaScript program, and the web server containing the web application being tested so that they would belong to the same domain as well. And this led to the birth of Selenium remote control, or we know it as RC, which is credited to then ThoughtWorks engineer Paul Hammond. And RC overcame the problem by involving an HTTP proxy server to trick the browser into believing that Selenium Core and the web application being tested has come from the same domain, and thus making the RC a two-component tool where we have a Selenium server, RC server, and then we also get a Selenium RC client. So RC server basically communicates using the simple HTTP GET and POST request. So from Selenium version 3 onwards, RC has been deprecated and moved to legacy package. So we can, however, download and work with RC, but unfortunately, we cannot avail support for it. But on the flip side, why would we want to use a tool which is outdated, right? And especially when there is more efficient tool called Selenium available as part of Selenium WebDriver. So before we talk about WebDriver, so we can discuss about the ID and Grid as well. So IDE is something that we had discussed, and we had also discussed on RC here. So we also have something called as grid. So Selenium Grid was developed by Patrick Lightbody, and initially it was called as a hosted Q&A. So initially it was a part of Selenium version 1, and then it was used in combination with RC as in remote control to run tests on remote machines. And it was used in combination with RC to run tests on remote machines. In fact, with Grid, multiple test scripts can be executed at the same time on multiple machines. So parallel execution is achieved by using Grid with the help of hub node architecture. So one machine will assume the role of a hub while the others will be the nodes. And hub controls the test scripts running on various browsers inside various operating systems. And test scripts being executed on different nodes can be written in different programming languages as well as and when required. All right. And Grid is still in use and works with both WebDriver and RC. However, maintaining a grid with all required browsers and operating systems is a bit challenging. And for this, there are multiple online platforms that provide an online Selenium grid that we can access to run our Selenium automation scripts, depending upon the requirement here. So let's proceed further. So we had discussed on these tools as well. We had discussed on IDE, which is basically a Firefox plugin, which is used to create and execute multiple test cases. And it records and playbacks the interactions which the user had with the web browser. And using IDE, we can export the programming code in different languages, such as Java, Ruby, Python, etc. And then we have, again, in terms of the Selenium IDE features, we can use it for creating and editing test cases, create and execute test suites, and then we have the debug and enhanced test cases available, where we can test cases which can be exported into different platform. PL refers to platform here, and it enables learning on Selenium script syntax. And as we discussed, there are multiple drawbacks of Selenium as well. It supports only Mozilla Firefox browser. It is not suitable for dynamic web applications. And there are no support for programming logic. And data-driven testing is not going to be possible here. And there is no centralized maintenance of objects or any elements here. And then we have RC, which refers to remote control, which is basically used to write web applications tests in different platforms. It is going to interact with the browsers with the help of Selenium RC browser itself server. And then here we have RC server, which is going to communicate using simple HTTP and GET POST methods here. So Selenium's we can say Selenium's project flagship tool was Selenium RC itself, as it was a first tool and it could be used to write test cases in different programming languages. Now, but the drawbacks with RC is that every communication with RC server is time consuming, and hence RC is and had been very slow, and so slow that it would sometimes take hours to complete single tests, and that's why it has now been deprecated here. All right, and then we have WebDriver. So Selenium WebDriver is basically a programming interface to create and execute test cases. So test cases are created and executed using elements, objects, locators, WebDriver methods. And then we have Selenium WebDriver, which has a programming interface, not the IDE. And Selenium IDE supports only IDE, and it does not support having any programming interface. And it is fast as it interacts with our browsers directly. So we need to have the RC server to interact with the browser in case we are using it. And WebDriver, as we know, it was founded by Simon Stewart in 2006. And Selenium WebDriver was the first cross-platform testing framework that could control the browser from the OS level. And in contrast to IDE, Selenium WebDriver provides a programming interface to create and execute multiple test cases. Now, these test cases are written such that web elements on web pages are identified and then actions are performed on those elements. So WebDriver is basically an upgrade to RC because it is much faster, and it is faster because because here it simply makes direct call to the browser instead of going through a server. And RC, on the other hand, needs an RC server to interact with the web browser. That's why it is much faster. And each browser has its own driver on which the application runs. So the different web drivers include Firefox, Chrome, Internet Explorer, Opera, Safari, and HTML unit driver as well. So these all are different web drivers available. All right, so now we are going to see a small hands-on on how we can work with, how we can get started working on Selenium. And then we are going to see, here we are going, next we are going to also discuss on the concepts of XPath available in Selenium as well. So we are going to discuss on how exactly it works step by step as we are going to proceed further. So now we are going to see a small script of Selenium in Java itself. So I can walk you through the entire script. So here we can use any IDE as part of the requirement. We can use IntelliJ, we can use the Selenium IDE itself as part of the requirement. So we can choose any of the IDs as part of the requirement defined. So we can make use of a local ID as a part of, in terms of the Selenium ID, we can simply define all the parameters and we can use any of the ID as part of the requirement. All right, so now we are going to create a new, so here currently we are working on the IntelliJ ID itself, where we can create the entire script, or we can use the Selenium ID as an extension available in the web browsers. We can do both. So before we discuss on the script, what exactly we are going to do, we are simply going to create a script for performing the test on any specific web page. For example, let's say if we refer to Facebook, let's open a Facebook page in another browser. So we can go incognito. So here we can type in as facebook.com. So so again, we are pretty sure that, again, I'm pretty sure that we all have Facebook accounts, right? So we can see on how we can log into Facebook bypassing the credentials from the code itself. So there are two text fields available on Facebook page, as you can see here. Here we have to enter the email address and the password, correct? So we can locate these two elements, pass on the credentials to those elements, and then find the third element, which is basically the login element, or we can say here we have a creative account, or in case we have the login button also available, correct? Right? So if we inspect these two elements, or these three elements, then we will get the same window in the browser as well. For example, say if we right click here and we click on inspect as a part of the browser, so at the end, you are going to, in case, even if in case you don't have the Facebook account, you are going to understand, okay, how exactly to work around any application, because at the end, form is something which is common to every website, almost every website requiring some kind of extensions, correct? Or we have some kind of forms available there, correct? So you'll be having understanding on how these things work. So if we go ahead and inspect the elements, so here we can see here we have input type defined as text for the current element, correct? So here we have the input type defined as text. Suppose here we are focusing on the email here. Same way here we can find out the input type defined for password as well. Correct. So here we have defined the same password, and then we also have the login button as well. Suppose if we right click here and click on inspect, we will be finding that all of these three elements are available here itself. Correct. So there are three portions highlighted, and the first element is the email text field, and the second one is the password, and the third one is the login button. All right. Now for finding the elements of, let me just guide you on how exactly the entire process works. So we have so here we can go back to our ID, and then we can name it as Selenium WebDriver. All right, so whenever we are working on any ID, first of all, we have to define the package. So currently we are going to work on Selenium WebDriver, and then we have to import the OpenQA Selenium WebDriver, because at the end, if you don't import these, then we won't be able to work on those, correct? So first of all, we have to import the WebDrivers as well. So basically this OpenQA Selenium WebDriver is going to be a library, is basically a library package which contains a required class to initiate the browser loaded with a specific driver. And then we have the OpenQA Selenium Firefox driver, which is going to be a library package which contains a Firefox driver class that needs to start Firefox as the browser initiated by the WebDriver class here. And then we have to import the concurrent time unit, which is basically used for notifying the runtime engine that the Gecko driver is present. Okay, suppose in case we are including some kind of Gecko drivers as well, so then we can use that Gecko driver element as well that we have omitted for now in the specific path. All right. And then we have to, first of all, here we are, what we are doing here we are defining the system set property as WebDriver as Gecko driver as we discussed. So this is going to notify the runtime engine that Gecko driver is present in the specified path. And after Firefox 35, we need to download the Gecko driver for working with WebDrivers. And in case you want to test out on Chrome, then we have to download Chrome driver as well, which is basically a simple executable file and specify its path in this line of code as well. So currently we define this as a part of files and Gecko driver itself, and we can be specific where exactly we have stored Gecko driver. All right, and here we can define WebDriver. So this command is going to be simply initiate a new Firefox driver object. And then we have driver.get where we are going to specify the link. So this method is going to be used to open the specified URL. And then we have driver.manage as window maximize. So basically here we can define any specific command that we want to run here. So basically, if you want to get title, then we can define get title as well. If you want to quit, then we can define quit as well. If you want to navigate to a specific URL, if you want the browser tab to be refreshed, if you want to go back, then we can define all the parameters here, correct? So here we can get the title of the web page. We can navigate to a specific path in this. If you want the URL, the web browser tab should be navigated to this particular URL. So first of all, it is going to open a Facebook, and then we want that this one should be moved to us to another URL when you can define it as a part of navigate. And then we can, if you want the browser to come back to its previous path, then we can define back. And if you want the same page to be refreshed, then we can define refresh. And then we can define wait. That means how long we want to wait after this page has been initiated. And then we can define the five elements. So by name, we can define if we have multiple names defined in the parameters. For example, if we go back to Facebook, we can find, so here we define input text, right? So here we have input class, we have name. So the password field has been saved by the name of pass. The email field has been saved by the name of email. And the input button is what having the button name defined as login, correct? So these things are going to be the ones that are going to be located in the given page, correct? And that is what we have defined here. So here we define driver dot find element by name, where we define email, and this can, and then here we have to send keys. That means whatever email we want to log in with. For example, we can enter our own email that we do when we are logging in with to Facebook, and then we can define the same thing for password, whatever password we want to be entered, and then we have to define the login button itself. For example, here we have now here instead of going for U0Q, we have the name defined not by ID here, since we have a name defined as login itself, correct? So either we can refer to class or we can refer to ID as well. So ID has been U underscore 0 underscore B. So we know that we can refer to the elements by the IDs, by the name or class. So we can define ID to be referred here. And then if we want the button to be clicked as well, then we can define the correct statement. And then afterwards, we want the entire element, that means all the elements or the entire WebDriver should quit. Then we can define the quit statement as well, as and when required. And we can also use the ID that we have initiated with the plugins. So for example, if we want to record any activity, then we can also do that by using the Selenium ID plugin as well. We can use the IDs here. For example, if we go ahead and use Firefox, so then here we can get the ID for Firefox as well. So we can simply initiate the ID in which we can have the entire code executed as well. So let's say here we also want, now if we want, we can also use this entire GUI platform as well to record exactly what needs to be tested. So for example, if we want to record a new test, then here we can click on record a new test for a new project. So, and then suppose if you want to define the project name as suppose Edureka, or it's a simple web app. So here we can give the name. We can define the base URL. Let's say here we want to start with Facebook. So here we can define facebook.com. That means the base URL we want to start with. And then we can click on start recording. So as you can see here, the base URL has been opened up as Facebook. And now currently we are recording, right? So here we can end, for example, here we can enter whatever needs to be defined. For example, here we want to test it out for the own ID here, right? So here we can define the ID, or if you want to import the login from Chrome, then we can also define it. And then whatever we enter here, we have to define, as you can see here, the login link has been recorded as well. So in case the entire process is repeated, then everything that we are doing here, that is going to be recorded as and when required. And once we are done, we can simply close this up. And as you can see here, we can stop the recording. We can define test name, suppose as Facebook login. Here we can define as Facebook login. And if we expand this one, we can see there have been 16 different activities that we had conducted, right? So we have opened a link, then we have set the window size, when we have clicked again on email, then we have typed in, and then we can define the entire credentials here, whatever has been typed in and whatever has been clicked in. And towards the end, we have clicked on the login button, and then we have closed the entire window. So again, if you want to read on the entire script again, we can simply press play, and then the entire activity is going to be repeated automatically as part of the requirement defined here. Thank you so much for joining, guys, and have a great day ahead. Take care. Bye-bye.